Welcome. This is an introduction to design, sponsored by CyberSpark, which is where we work. My name is Nick Whitwer. You can find me at nickwhitwer.com. This is Marcos. Say hi.
Hi, you can find me at marcosmtz.com.
And CyberSpark is a design and development company here in San Jose. And we're all students, actually, here at San Jose State. So, just a kind of cool side note. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. We'll kind of explore what is design, some fundamentals about design, some personal tips, tools of the trade, what UX and UI mean, and then some process of how you should go about design and how you can come up with an awesome design every time. And then we'll also give you some resources and some suggestions on how you can improve your design. Awesome, so let's do this thing. But first, what is good design? So this is 10 principles from industrial designer Dieter Rams, who was a famous German designer who actually designed this watch. So good design is, first of all, it's innovative. It's useful, it has an aesthetic, it's understandable, unobtrusive, honest, long-lasting, thorough. This one doesn't apply, ever environmentally friendly, because industrial design you have to worry about materials and making sure you're doing the best thing for the environment. And then the last one is really important, which is good design is as little design as possible. This sounds really basic, but once you really start getting into design, you'll understand that rather than following a trend or just kind of putting something in because you think it looks nice, you'll start to design more for the content. And so as little design as possible means that you're designing so that the content itself will reach better goals. So as little design as possible. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of design. So you have color, typography, photography, composition, and then this thing called the grid. How many of you are web developers? So have you guys heard of the grid? So kind of like Bootstrap. Have you used Twitter Bootstrap or Zerb Foundation? So those all kind of rely on a grid system, which is actually really similar to design. This grid helps with alignment. It helps with visual consistency and making sure that because everything's aligned, you have this visual hierarchy, which we'll talk a little bit about later. The grid should be used for all of your projects to make sure that everything looks nice and tidy. And then the grid will also help you, as I was saying, transition to development, as you'll be able to see. This is so many columns, rows, all that fantastic stuff. And just going back to the basics, all of these things you could spend months or years learning, just color theory, how to choose a good font, photography, all this stuff. Don't worry too much about that. Right now, I think the grid is probably the most important thing you can start learning. Yeah. So just some personal design tips. Actually, most of my suite mates are developers, and the thing that I've noticed most with their work is that they don't have enough white space. And I know that this is a problem for me as well, but if you think you have enough white space, which is basically the amount of space between content, like text, for example,
Negative space?
Or negative space, you basically want to double or triple whatever you think is enough white space, and then once you've doubled or tripled it, then you probably have something near what's actually good. But you want enough room to breathe between content. And again, you're designing for the content. So if you have a bunch of text, you want to have space so that you can breathe and actually take in what it's saying. Another tip is that you need to realize that design is an ongoing process, and it's actually never really done. Um, so don't get too disappointed when you reach the end of this process, which we'll talk a little bit about later, and then you notice something that could be improved, because this process just kind of keeps going, and you'll get better and better as time goes on. Another thing is that, just a quick process thing, you want to start with sketching, and sketching is supposed to be very loose, very fast. And then you'll move into using a computer for mock-ups, and then eventually you'll start really caring about pushing pixels and all the little finite design details. When you're just starting out, I wouldn't suggest using more than 3 colors, just because it can get really confusing and usually looks pretty messy. So I'd start out, especially when you're just doing layouts, I'd start out doing a gray, a black, and a white, just so that you can organize hierarchically what's the most important. So most important would be in black, and then gray is like secondary, and then white would be tertiary. Another thing is don't be trendy without purpose. This is becoming a really big problem, especially you've probably noticed this if you've done web design. Parallax and all of that, sticky headers and all this great stuff. It's cool, but that's kind of the extent of it, is that it's just kind of cool. So the point being, don't be trendy without a purpose. So if you're using a trend like parallax, for example, it better be there for a good reason. So if if your content is a bunch of images, right, and you're telling the story as you scroll down the page, parallax might be a good way to go. But don't do this just to be trendy. Do it because it actually serves a purpose, and it helps you achieve whatever goals you set out from the get-go. And then when you get stuck creatively, push yourself to iterate more, to create just more versions of your design. This can be really hard at times, but the more you do it, the more ideas you'll generate, and in the long run, this will actually save you a lot of time, because you'll be able to go back and look at, this idea was actually related to my topic and would solve a certain goal. Learn how to use critiques. This is kind of a hard one if you're not taking design classes, but the idea is that you should find a group of people or a couple people that are willing to give you feedback on your work. And when they're giving you this feedback, you need to be really open to receiving it and not being protective of your work, because this will, again, help you come up with a lot of great ideas and make a product that people actually need, or it'll solve a problem that you set out to fix. And then don't use design templates, because it's lazy and you won't learn much. That said, if you go on a site like Dribbble and you want to recreate this design, this is actually a really good way to learn how to design, because you'll notice as you make it, how wide a box is compared to the text, and you'll start to see all these little design details along the way. But then when you're done with that, don't post it online and say it's yours, because it's not. So design solves problems. This is really important to understand, because it goes back to designing with a purpose. So before you start any design project, what I suggest doing is creating goals. These can be business goals. Actually, they're usually business goals that you want to achieve through your design. And then at the end of the process, you'll be able to look back and say, was my design successful? Well, did it meet the business goals that I set out to accomplish in the first place? And then you also want to think one step ahead. And when I say this, I mean one step ahead of your client or your user and kind of guess how they're going to use the product and how you can improve the product before they even give you feedback. This will just keep your designs moving forward and help you. So now I just want to quickly talk about some of the tools of the trade. The big three right now are Illustrator, Photoshop, and Sketch. Sketch is kind of the new guy in the ring. It's a vector program, which means that the artwork will be able to scale, which is awesome for Retina designs. And Sketch is also really great for creating low fidelity and humongous project designs because it allows you to reuse resources and objects. And then for user flows, which is basically showing how a user goes from point A to point B, usually with arrows and a bunch of screens. I prefer Illustrator, but this is a personal choice. Sketch works just as well. And then high fidelity, or the pixel pushing. Photoshop is still probably the best thing out there, but you can always debate that. And then the note at the bottom, I think most of you are probably SJSU students, so go ahead and get Adobe, all the stuff for free. I can hook you up with that link afterwards, but everything is free as long as you're a student. So now I just want to talk a little bit about what UX is and what UI is, because this is pretty confusing, especially if you haven't really been immersed in the design world. So just kind of understanding the titles and what even is UX and UI. So UI just stands for user interface, and the user interface is usually it's kind of how it looks. And this button is like a certain width and color, and the typography is this font, versus UX, which is user experience, which usually has two parts actually. It's not just UX design. There's actually user experience research, which is probably the biggest difference between UX and UI. So research is it's a really, really big topic, but it's basically understanding the user and how they'll be interacting with your interface. So again, user experience, how it feels, user interface, how it looks. And then this is kind of generally the process for design, but specifically UX design. So you'll start out with your research and you'll start doing some problem solving. Again, set up those goals to figure out what you want to achieve through your design. How's your design fixing whatever the problem was before? Or if it's something new, how is it gonna improve upon someone's life in whatever minuscule way it will be doing. So you'll do your research and your problem solving. And then you'll notice that a sub-note of each one of these steps is to get feedback and to iterate. This is really important because it just allows you to figure out what's wrong with your designs before it's live. And this will also help you come up with ideas and just keep everything fresh. So step 2 is to sketch, and I say that you should do sketching quickly. Keep it loose and fast. Don't worry about making it pretty yet. That'll come later. Just trust in the process. And then number 3 is low fidelity, which is just black and white. And we'll go over all of these in a little bit of detail. And then lastly is high fidelity, which is the pixel pushing, the specific design elements that you include. So the research, but I just wanted to do design, right? So the research, it'll help you understand the users. It'll help you make informed design choices. And then it'll also help you show your clients how statistically you'll be solving their problem. So if they already have a site up, for example, and they have Google Analytics, you can go in and see, here's the most popular pages, here's kind of the user flow, here's where they come into the website, and then here's where they leave. And you can kind of analyze that and show your client or whoever you're working with how your design will improve this. And then a couple little side notes. I suggest you looking into user stories and research methods such as interviews and eye tracking, and the list goes on. But go ahead and look those up and kind of learn more about the user research process. So the second step, sketching. You should think of this as visual brainstorming rather than pretty drawings. So as I was saying before, you should be sketching fast. This is a really big one, avoiding love at first sight. This is something I still do after years of design. I'll start drawing something out, and then I'll just keep adding to it, and at this point I've fallen in love with the idea, and I'm not iterating anymore. And this is a really common pitfall because when you're not iterating, you won't come up with all the possible ideas, therefore limiting yourself. So don't fall in love at first sight if you can. Just push through and keep making iterations of your designs.
And kind of to add to that, I mean, some people they'll sketch a couple things and then they get stuck. They're like, I don't know what else to sketch. So in order to be able to come up with more ideas on what to sketch, you actually have to research more. And that's based on your research is what you sketch. And if any weird ideas come into your mind, it's okay. Just sketch them because you'd be surprised how many of these ideas turn out being successful in the future.
And they don't have to be fully fleshed out ideas as well. They can just be little, widgets or small parts that you can add to your overall design later. And then use a pen, because if you're using a pencil, you're more likely to fall in love at first sight and tweak and edit this thing until it looks beautiful. But I suggest using a pen because then you can't erase, and you'll just have to keep coming up with new iterations, and it'll keep you away from falling in love. Lastly, Crazy Eights. This is a little fun design exercise that Google Ventures actually practices. Basically, you take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, you fold it in half, and then you fold it again, and this will give you 8 different folds of the paper. And what you're going to be doing is you'll draw 8 sketches. You'll spend about 40 seconds to a minute on each sketch in each quadrant of the paper, and at the end you'll have 8 sketches or 8 ideas that you can move forward with. So it's kind of a fun way to, if you're stuck, Crazy Eights are kind of a fun way to push yourself and come up with some new ideas. Step 3 is low fidelity. And low fidelity is kind of the layout and visual hierarchy of the design. So this is actually a design that Marcos came up with for a project we're working on right now called The Grove, which is a music, kind of like a music blog. So as you can see, it's all very simple, right? Just grays, whites, just to kind of show the visual hierarchy and just lay things out. And we came up with quite a few different variations of this because we don't want to get locked into anything yet. So black and white and maybe gray, focus on your contrast and your layout. This is good for simple layout mockups. Don't get into anything too detailed, so keep the shapes really simple. Don't worry about your typography or photography. You can actually just use rectangles to simulate where your text is going to show up, just so that you don't even think about, what font do I want to use for this.
So just where's the text going to be?
Yeah, so it's more of a
Blocking.
yeah, exactly. So use a block to kind of show where your text is going to show up. And then tons of iterations. Again, like this is for every step of the way. You want tons of iterations so that you can choose your best stuff. And then lastly, before you move into the next step, you want to choose which a couple of your low fidelity mockups, which ones are the best. So you can move forward and bring these into high fidelity design. So this is a more fleshed out version of what you were seeing for low fidelity. That kind of shows the colors, the typography, some photography, and then all of the goodies and pixel perfection. So that's high fidelity. Keep in mind, there's in UX and the design process, there's kind of one more step, which is the launch and the analysis. So after you actually push out the product, it's not done with the design process. As I was saying before, like design is never done because after you finish the design and launch it, you need to track how it's performing. You have to make sure that the design is helping you reach those business goals that you set out to accomplish in the first place. And then you have to look at it and say, well, okay, so if it's not reaching those business goals, then how can I tweak the design in order to reach those goals? And depending on how big of a change that would require, you might have to restart the whole process of sketching it out and brainstorming, and then low fidelity and high fidelity, and all of that great stuff. So now I just want to show you a quick video. So this is just kind of about when you get stuck with design and the first few years of design and just not giving up.
Beide Positionen, vielleicht richtig vorgefertigt für den ehrlich bin, ein ganz tolles Gespräch.
Nobody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap, that for the first couple years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just like say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste, they could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. It didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, you got to know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month you know you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that. Okay?
A couple more slides. So if you want to get inspired for design and see what people are doing, I suggest checking out Dribble. This is dribble.com. Notice that there are 3 B's. This is a good one, but beware that this is a very trendy site. And remember what I was saying about trends, which is make sure that it serves a purpose and it helps solve a goal. Don't just use it because it's trendy. Behance.net is also a good one. And then Pinterest, of course. And then there's also this one called Patterns. And I guess it's in beta right now. But this will just show kind of like specific parts of design. So if you want to look at how people are doing footers or headers or something like that, then this is a great place to check out what people are doing. And then if you want to find us online, again, my name's Nick Whitwer, nickwhitwer.com. And then I tweet sometimes. This is Marcos. Find him at marcosmtz.com. More about CyberSpark, cyberspark.us. And then we're also on Facebook. Questions?
So how long should it be till I start posting on Dribble with my creation?
Well, actually, so the interesting thing about Dribble is that you have to be chosen to post your stuff. So you'll have to get an invite from a designer who's already on it. I don't have any invites right now, sorry. But if you want to actually put your designs up and get feedback, Behance, you can just sign up and start posting. They also have some student organizations on there, so you can post for San Jose State, and kind of people that are also in that group will see it.
Do you have any recommendations for a kind of pen? Because
Sharpie.
I do Sharpie.
Big, fat
I
Sharpie.
like these mainly for like small areas, but I do have plenty of Sharpies. And how would you say to make the transition as coming from someone who has been told for 80% of our life that you should only sketch in pencil?
Well, so actually, you're probably not going to like it at first, to be honest, because you'll have a lot less control. Because if you're using a Sharpie, right, you can't be detailed. But that's the point of this thing. Thanks again, everyone, for coming and trekking through the rain. And then if anyone's interested in future events or a certain topic, typography, again, as I was saying, like there's a lot of detail that you can go into. Mobile apps, just let us know, and we'll see if we can get something going on.